Hey, good morning. Yes, it is. It's Saturday morning, March 23rd. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I had a little bit to spare this morning. I got up early, 3:30. So I said, well, shoot, I'm going to watch a couple of videos of other mechanics working on stuff. And I'll let you know what I'm seeing. All right, so stay tuned. So welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Eric. I do the weekday Monday through Friday, and then sometimes I do videos on Saturday and Sunday. No, most of the time. So I had a chance to watch this morning because I got up extra early. Sheeby decided she would bark at something she heard. So I said, well, I haven't had time to sit down and watch anybody else's videos. Let's do some video binging this morning, right? So I watched 4 or 5 different mechanics. And I'm not going to say who they are. But there was a general trend that maybe I'm missing the boat, but maybe not. See, when it comes to our shop, we know it needs compression, we know it needs fire, we know it needs good fuel, and we know it needs air. All 4 of those have to be present. And other than me listening to the customer and doing a quick visual, the first thing I do is I go to compression. Very first. Because if you do anything else on that unit, whether it be a chainsaw or a riding lawnmower, push mower, trimmer, you're wasting your time, as far as I'm concerned. And I wasn't seeing that in the videos that I watched this morning. Actually, only one of them actually did a compression check, but that was after they did a bunch of other checks that, check to see if there's water in the fuel, check to see this, check to see that. The reason I check compression first is that I know that if it does not have the compression, it will not run. No matter what changes I do to it, unless I do a rebuild, it will not run. I don't need to pull the muffler bolts on a chainsaw and check the scoring, because by doing a compression check, if it's got scoring, it's going to show up, because what's going to end up happening is it's not going to be able to build the necessary pressure at 90 psi or above for it to run. It's going to go by the rings. I don't need a fancy camera to look inside the cylinders before I do a compression check. It's a waste of time. Now, if you do compression, you got good compression, you want to check the cylinder on a chainsaw, okay. But you really need to have a rule in place when it comes to each piece of equipment. And in our shop, it's always compression first. We do a visual, talk to the customer, and then right off the bat, I got the compression tester out, and I'm checking it. And if it checks low, I actually have 3 compression testers. I will pull out one of the other ones just to make sure that there's not an issue with the tester, that it is actually the unit I'm working on. Because I've had times where a compression tester actually went bad on me. And had I not had another one to make sure, I would have basically said the saw's no good. So you want to make sure you got good compression and that your tester's working fine. And a lot of times what I do is if it's running low, I'll take it out, put the second one in. If it's getting the same reading, then I know where it's at. If it's not, then we need to look at, is it time for the old compression tester to get tossed? Alright, so you want to do compression first, and then I go to fire, and I use a spark tester. And I use a spark tester because I can visually see how much spark there is. And if it's a strong spark, then I like it. If it's a dim spark, then I also have 3 or 4 spark testers. I'll throw a different one on it, because if it's a dim spark, it may not have enough to allow whatever you're working on to run correctly. So if the unit you're working on is not putting out enough of a impulse through the coil on that unit, and you've got good compression, it may be a hard starting machine, or it just doesn't rev right up completely. And it could be the pickup, could be the coil. Coil's getting weak. A lot of times I've found with coils on most of the units out there is that they'll run a length of time and stop, and it stays about that same, or it just quits working entirely. You have to be the investigator. You have to try to figure out where is it at. If it's a weak spark and it's showing that on 2 different testers that you have, then you need to stop there and figure out, why is it so weak? Why is it not coming out? Is the coil fine, but the plug wire coming from the coil, which is most of the time, you can't change it, right? Especially on chainsaws. The only option you have at that point is just to replace the coil, right? But you want to make sure that the flywheel is where the magnets and stuff are, that there's no corrosion. I've seen that happen before, just a little bit of emery cloth, and you go from a weak spark to a good slamming spark that you need. So compression first, spark, good spark. Then I go on to fuel. And a lot of times with fuel, it's one of a few culprits, okay? It's either one, they're using ethanol fuel and have allowed it to sit for a while. Now they say that if it can't get, if it's not exposed to air, then the idea of moisture condensation is less. And you would think in a chainsaw, with it having a fuel cap that's pretty snug, right, that it couldn't draw any moisture. But if you have dead space in that tank, let's say you only have a half tank of fuel in it, there's still going to be some moisture condensation able to develop in that chainsaw. Not as much as one that has a vented cap, or an open cap. So I always recommend, especially on the older saws, guys, run the E in non-ethanol. And if you watch one of my videos, you'll see where you got to be careful too at the pump. Is if you're going to use non-ethanol, with the person ahead of you in line, if they're putting in ethanol fuel into their vehicle and they hang it up and it's only got one pump, but you push, there's 3 different settings, whatever the person ahead of you put into their vehicle or into their fuel tank or holding tank, fuel can, you're going to get so much of that before you get what you asked for. So a lot of times what I do is, if I'm going to get non-ethanol fuel, I'll pull up to the pump where I can reach my truck, and I will get the pump running and put non-ethanol, but I'll put the first couple seconds right into my truck. I want the ethanol fuel into my truck, not in my fuel cans to go in my chainsaw and my lawnmowers, because it doesn't work, right? The other thing that I find is debris in fuel tanks. And that could be simply if you're running a chainsaw, and this is usually the culprit as far as getting crap in your fuel tank, is a lot of people, they don't clean around the area for the fuel or the oil before adding. They just pop the cap off, add some more, put it back on, and go again. And working on customers' chainsaws had me change some of my habits, but I did that back when I used to fell trees. And that was, I would carry a paintbrush, a coarse hair, and usually about an inch and a half long, and I would clean all around where the fuel tank is, excuse me, and the oil tank. When I did that, because I didn't want any sawdust and gunk in my fuel, to plug up the fuel filter that's inside the tank. Excuse me. And I also didn't want, because every chainsaw needs bar oil, right? And I've seen so many times where they're not getting a good flow to their bar and they're burning their bars up. It's because the sawdust has fallen into the tank and it's trying to work its way out through to the bar, and it's partially plugged or plugged completely. That's why you brush it off every time before you fill up again. And a lot of people, don't even think about this, but I do. I carry, when I go in to cut wood and stuff like that, I have 2 or 3 saws with me. And one reason is so if one gets pinched, I got the second one to get it out, right? But the other is, it's not good to fill a chainsaw while it's hot, because that fuel could get onto the muffler and you could catch things on fire. Most people that I watch don't do that. They just go ahead when it runs out of fuel, instead of letting it sit and cool down, have a cigarette, have some coffee, what have you. They're refilling it, going again. And you got to be real careful with that, because I have seen chainsaws burst into fire with fuel hitting the muffler. But that is very hot if you just ran a tank of fuel through it. Steady. So you want to keep your 2 tanks clean. And that's simply just carry a paintbrush, small one, of course, and clean all around those areas before you add any oil or any bar oil or any 50-to-1 mixed chainsaw gas. And make sure it's ethanol free. And then lastly comes air, right? We need air. We don't want too much, but we don't want not enough. And the air filter is there for 2 reasons. One is to keep the crap out of the carburetor, right? So that it gets a clean burn. But the other too is part of the system, okay? And your saw is made to run optimum with that filter on. And that air filter is going to be restricting a full blast of air, right? So it's going to act if you're trying to adjust a chainsaw to an idle or revving and this and that, and you're doing it with the carburetor or with the air filter off, a lot of times you're not going to get it perfect. Same thing with a lawnmower. Same thing with all of them. They're made to have that filter on. And that filter will provide so much restriction, which will help bring in more gas, kind of like when you choke a machine, right? Your system is set to run optimum with that clean air filter on the unit. So when it comes time to do your adjustments, leave the air filter in place and make sure it's a clean air filter. So I know some of you guys are going to add to this, which is very helpful, and I appreciate it. But I just thought I'd give my 5 cents, 10 cents worth, or my penny's worth, whatever way you want to look at it. Compression has to come first every time, or you're wasting your time and you're wasting your customer's time. On that note, you guys have a great Saturday, and I'll see if I can't put together a few more repair videos for you of where I'm actually getting frustrated with things. On that note, catch you later.